What would you do if your boss fired you for attending your own father's funeral, then replaced you with her incompetent nephew? Well, I didn't get mad. I got strategic. And 6 months later, that decision cost her everything: her job, her company, and her freedom. This is the story of how I turned the worst betrayal of my life into the best career move I ever made. My name is Alyssa Grant, and 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew what loyalty meant. I thought I understood what family looked like in the workplace. I was wrong about everything. I'd been the operations manager at Hawthorne Freight Solutions for 6 years. Not just any manager, the kind who remembered birthdays, who stayed late when shipments went sideways, who built a team that actually cared about each other. We weren't just coworkers, we were tight. My office overlooked the warehouse floor, and every morning I'd watch my team gear up for another day of moving America's cargo. Sarah coordinating with drivers, Marcus tracking shipments, Elena solving problems that shouldn't have solutions. These people trusted me, and I'd earned that trust one crisis at a time. But while I was building this perfect work family, my real family was falling apart. My father had been fighting cancer for 2 years. 2 years of hospital visits, of watching this strong man who taught me to change oil and negotiate contracts slowly disappear. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Dad's condition had worsened overnight. The doctor said we had days, maybe hours. I walked straight to Miranda Shaw's office, my boss for 3 years. Someone I genuinely respected. Miranda was in her 50s, always perfectly put together, the kind of executive who could close deals over lunch and still make it to her daughter's soccer games. When I knocked on her door that morning, she looked up from her laptop with that concerned expression I'd seen her use with stressed employees before. "Alyssa, what's wrong? It's my father," I said, and my voice cracked on the word father. "He's dying. I need to request bereavement leave." The transformation in Miranda's face was immediate. She stood up, came around her desk, and actually hugged me. "Of course, honey. Take all the time you need. Family comes first, always." She personally walked me to HR, made sure the paperwork was expedited, even offered to cover any expenses the company insurance wouldn't handle. "Don't you worry about anything here," she said, squeezing my shoulder. "We've got you covered." My father passed away that Thursday evening. I held his hand as he took his last breath, and for a moment the world went completely silent. 35 years of his love, his guidance, his terrible dad jokes, all of it compressed into this overwhelming weight in my chest. The funeral was Saturday. I'd been dreading it, but something unexpected happened. My entire team showed up. Not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Sarah brought flowers. Marcus helped with logistics. Elena organized the reception. Even some of our regular drivers came to pay their respects. Standing at the graveside, watching them lower my father into the ground, I felt this strange mixture of devastating loss and profound gratitude. I'd lost my dad, but I wasn't alone. I had this incredible work family who'd shown up when it mattered most. Miranda sent a beautiful arrangement with a card that read, "Take care of yourself. We'll be here when you're ready." Sunday night, I sat in Dad's empty house, surrounded by sympathy cards and casserole dishes from neighbors. I picked up my phone and texted Miranda, "Thank you for everything. I'll see you Monday morning." She replied within minutes, "There's no rush, Alyssa. Take the time you need to heal." But I wanted to get back to normal. I wanted the comfort of routine, the distraction of work, the warmth of my team. I wanted to return to the place where people had shown me what real loyalty looked like. I had no idea I was walking into a betrayal that would change everything I thought I knew about trust, about loyalty, about the difference between family and the people who just pretend to care when it's convenient. Monday morning was coming, and I was actually looking forward to it. I should have known better. In my experience, the moments when you feel most grateful for the people in your life are usually right before they show you who they really are. Monday morning, 7:30 a.m. I pulled into the Hawthorne Freight parking lot with my usual coffee and that familiar knot of Monday motivation in my stomach. The grief was still there, sitting heavy in my chest, but I was ready to get back to my life, ready to lose myself in spreadsheets and logistics puzzles, and the comfortable chaos of keeping America's freight moving on time. I walked up to the security turnstile and swiped my badge. The little light that should have turned green stayed red. I tried again. Red. Maybe the system was glitchy. It happens sometimes after weekends. "Excuse me," I called to Jerry, the security guard who'd been here since before I started. "My badge isn't working." Jerry looked uncomfortable. Actually uncomfortable, like someone had told him something he didn't want to repeat. Ms. Grant, I think you need to talk to HR." That's when the first cold finger of dread touched my spine, but I pushed it down. Technical glitch. System error. These things happened. I walked to the main entrance, signed in as a visitor, which felt bizarre after 6 years, and headed straight to my office. Except when I got there, the door was closed. Not just closed, but locked. My nameplate was gone. Sarah from my team spotted me in the hallway. Her face went white. "Alyssa, what are you doing here?" "What do you mean? What am I doing here? I work here." She looked around nervously, then pulled me aside. "Didn't you get the email?" "Email." I pulled out my phone, my hand suddenly shaking. There it was, sent at 11 p.m. last night while I was sorting through my father's photographs. The subject line read, "Employment status update." I opened it. The words hit me like a physical blow. "Dear Ms. Grant, your position has been vacated effective immediately due to prolonged unavailability during a critical operational period. Please contact Human Resources to arrange collection of personal items. Your final paycheck will be processed according to company policy." I read it 3 times. The words didn't change. Prolonged unavailability. Critical operational period. I'd been gone for 4 days. 4 days to bury my father. "Sarah," I said, and my voice sounded strange, distant. "Who sent this?" "Miranda's assistant." "But Alyssa, there's more. They've already replaced you." The hallway started to spin slightly. "Replaced me with who?" Sarah's expression shifted from sympathy to something that looked almost like disgust. "Miranda's nephew, Jordan. He's 24 and just graduated from some business program. He started this morning." I felt like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. "This morning, but my father's funeral was Saturday. It's Monday." "I know, we all know. This is insane, Alyssa. The whole team is furious. Marcus threatened to quit on the spot." I walked toward Miranda's office on autopilot. Her door was open, and I could see her inside talking animatedly to someone I didn't recognize. A young guy in an expensive suit that didn't quite fit right, gesturing with his hands like he was explaining something important. Miranda saw me approaching and immediately stood up, closing the door. But not before I heard her say, "Remember, Jordan confidence is key in leadership." Jordan, the nephew. Sitting in meetings I should have been running learning systems I'd built from the ground up. I knocked on Miranda's door. No answer. I knocked again, harder. "Miranda, I need to speak with you." Her assistant Janet appeared beside me. "Ms. Grant, Miranda is in a critical onboarding session. She's asked that all employment-related questions be directed to HR." Employment-related questions, like I was already a former employee asking about my 401k. "Janet, I've worked here for 6 years. My father died last week. I took bereavement leave that Miranda personally approved. I need to understand what's happening." Janet looked genuinely sorry, but her voice stayed professional. "I understand this is difficult. HR is expecting you." The walk to Human Resources felt like a death march. Donna Martinez, the HR director, was waiting for me with a folder and the kind of expression people wear when they're about to deliver bad news they didn't create. "Alyssa, please sit down." "Donna, there's been some kind of mistake. I was on approved bereavement leave. My father passed away." "I know, and I'm very sorry for your loss. But the decision has been made at the executive level. The company needs consistent leadership during peak shipping season." "Consistent leadership? I've been here 6 years. I've never missed a deadline, never failed to meet targets. I took 4 days off to bury my father." Donna shifted uncomfortably. The determination was made that your absence came at a critical time, and the company has moved forward with a replacement. Who made this determination, Miranda? I can't discuss internal decision-making processes, but she didn't have to. We both knew who made this call. So let me understand this correctly. I said, my voice getting quieter, more controlled. I asked for bereavement leave. Miranda approved it personally. She hugged me, told me family comes first, sent flowers to my father's funeral. And while I was literally putting my father in the ground, she was hiring her nephew to take my job. Donna looked down at her folder. I can give you boxes for your personal items. Security will escort you. That's when it hit me. The full scope of the betrayal. Miranda hadn't just fired me. She'd planned this. While she was offering to cover expenses and telling me to take all the time I needed, she was already interviewing her nephew. While my team was supporting me at my father's funeral, she was drafting termination emails. The woman who talked about family first had thrown me away the moment it became convenient. I stood up slowly. Donna, how long has Jordan been interviewing for this position? She hesitated just long enough to give me the answer. Exactly, I said. Pack the boxes. I'll be back in an hour. As I walked out of that building, past the security guard who couldn't meet my eyes, past the warehouse team who'd worked beside me for years, I felt something shift inside me. The grief was still there, but it was transforming into something sharper, clearer. Miranda Shaw had made the biggest mistake of her career. She'd underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. I'd spent 6 years building relationships, learning systems, earning respect. She thought she could erase all of that with one email and replace me with a 24-year-old who probably couldn't tell a bill of lading from a shipping manifest. She was about to learn the difference between having a title and actually knowing how to do the job. And I was about to show her what loyalty really looked like, when it's earned and what happens when it's betrayed. I returned to Hawthorne an hour later with an empty mind and a clear purpose. The security escort turned out to be Jerry, who kept apologizing under his breath as he walked me to my former office. Someone had already packed most of my things into 3 cardboard boxes, but they'd done it hastily, carelessly. My team photos were bent. My dad's old coffee mug, the one that said "World's Okayest Engineer," was wrapped in paper towels instead of bubble wrap. 6 years of my professional life crammed into boxes, like I was an intern who'd been let go. Marcus appeared in the doorway, his face red with anger. "This is garbage, Alyssa. Complete garbage." "Keep your voice down," I said, quietly, carefully straightening the team photo from last year's Christmas party. "You still work here," Elna joined him, practically vibrating with fury. "We all talked. We're going to Miranda together. This is wrong on every level." "No, you're not." I looked up at them both. "You have mortgages, families, careers. Don't torpedo your futures over this." Sarah pushed past Jerry into the office. "At least tell us you're going to fight this. Wrongful termination, discrimination, something." I picked up my father's coffee mug, the ceramic smooth and familiar in my hands. "I'm going to handle this my way." What they didn't understand, what none of them could see, was that I was already fighting. Just not the way they expected. While we talked, I was memorizing everything. The way Jerry avoided eye contact, the nervous energy from Janet when she passed by, the fact that Miranda's office door had been closed all morning, unusual for someone who prided herself on an open-door policy. Most importantly, I was cataloging every detail about Jordan Shaw. I'd gotten a good look at him through Miranda's window, and he looked exactly like what he was. A kid playing dress-up in daddy's clothes. Or, in this case, Aunt's company. "You know what the worst part is," Marcus said, lowering his voice. "He spent the morning asking us to explain basic shipping terminology. Kid doesn't know the difference between FOB and SIF." Elena shook her head. "He asked me why we track delivery confirmations, like why we need to know if packages actually arrived." That was useful information. I filed it away. Jerry cleared his throat. "Ms. Grant, I'm sorry, but we need to finish up here." I lifted the boxes and walked out of Hawthorne Freight Solutions for what I thought would be the last time. My team followed me to the parking lot, still talking about protests and walkouts and righteous indignation. Listen to me, I said, setting the boxes in my trunk. Be smart about this. Document everything, every mistake, every confusion, every time a client complains. But do it quietly and keep doing your jobs well. Sarah frowned. You want us to just accept this? I want you to be professionals. And I want you to trust me. The drive home was strange. I should have been crying, or screaming, or calling lawyers. Instead, I felt this odd sense of clarity, like I was seeing the situation from above. Miranda had made a calculated move, but she'd also made assumptions about my reaction, about my resources, about what I was capable of doing. She was about to learn how wrong those assumptions were. At home, I made coffee in Dad's mug, opened my laptop, and started working. Not on job applications or legal complaints, but on research. Deep, methodical research. Jordan Shaw, 24 years old, LinkedIn profile that read like a participation trophy collection. Bachelor's degree in business management from a mid-tier private college. 2 previous jobs, both lasting less than 8 months. The first job was at a small logistics company in Tampa. I found the LinkedIn profile of his former supervisor, a woman named Patricia Ruiz. Her current job listed her as consultant, business recovery and restructuring. That was code for fixing companies that were falling apart. I dug deeper. The Tampa company had gone out of business 6 months after Jordan left. Could have been coincidence, but I made a note. His second job was more interesting. Assistant operations manager at Meridian Shipping in Orlando. I cross-referenced the dates with news articles and found something fascinating. Meridian had been hit with a major client lawsuit during Jordan's tenure, alleging consistent delivery delays and missing shipments. I found the lawsuit filing. It specifically mentioned systemic operational failures and inadequate management oversight during the time period when Jordan would have been learning the ropes. But here's what was really interesting. Jordan had left that job just 2 weeks before the lawsuit was filed, with a LinkedIn update that said he was pursuing new opportunities in strategic business development. Strategic business development. That was corporate speak for unemployed but trying to sound important. I kept digging, social media posts, college newspaper articles, even his mother's Facebook page. The picture that emerged was of a young man who'd been coasted through life on family connections, never staying anywhere long enough to face real consequences. Miranda had hired her nephew not despite his failures, but because she didn't know about them. She'd seen a business degree and family loyalty, and assumed that was enough to run a complex operation. But what she'd really done was hand a sophisticated logistics network to someone who'd never successfully managed anything more complicated than his college fraternity's social calendar. I spent 3 hours building a comprehensive profile of Jordan Shaw's professional history. Every failure, every early departure, every company that had struggled after his involvement. It painted a clear picture of a pattern that Miranda should have seen if she'd done any real due diligence. But she hadn't, because this was never about finding the best person for the job. This was about family favor disguised as business decision. As I worked, my phone kept buzzing with texts from my former team, updates about Jordan's first day, each message more incredulous than the last. From Marcus, he just asked if we ship packages on weekends. From Elena, tried to explain route optimization. He looked at me like I was speaking Chinese. From Sarah, 3 different clients called asking where their shipments are. He transferred them all to customer service because he doesn't understand tracking systems. I didn't respond to any of the texts, but I screenshot every single one. Evidence, documentation, the paper trail that would matter later. By evening, I had built something Miranda Shaw wouldn't see coming. A complete picture of her nephew's incompetence and a detailed record of her failure to perform basic due diligence before handing him control of a multi-million-dollar operation. But more than that, I had something else. I had patience. Miranda expected me to react emotionally, to make noise, to give her a reason to justify what she'd done. She expected anger and desperation and the kind of messy blow-up that would make her look reasonable in comparison. Instead, she was going to get silence. Strategic, calculated silence while I built my case and waited for Jordan to prove all by himself exactly how catastrophic her decision had been. I closed my laptop and looked around Dad's quiet house. He'd taught me that the most powerful response to betrayal wasn't revenge. It was success. And success required patience, preparation, and the willingness to let your enemies defeat themselves. Miranda Shaw had just given me the perfect opportunity to do exactly that. Tuesday morning, I woke up with a plan. Not the desperate, scrambling kind of plan you make when you're panicking, but the methodical, strategic kind that comes from thinking 3 moves ahead. I scrolled through my phone contacts until I found the name I was looking for, Clara Dawson, Vice President of Operations at OmniRoute Logistics. We'd met 18 months ago at a supply chain conference in Phoenix, and she'd tried to poach me over dinner and wine that probably cost more than most people's car payments. "Alyssa," she'd said back then, leaning across the table with that sharp smile that had probably intimidated half the logistics industry, "you're wasted at Hawthorne. When you're ready to play in the big leagues, call me." I'd politely declined. I was loyal to Miranda, committed to my team, comfortable in my role. I thought stability mattered more than opportunity. 18 months later, sitting in my father's empty kitchen, I realized how naive that decision had been. I dialed Clara's direct line. She answered on the second ring. "Clara Dawson." "Clara, it's Alyssa Grant from Hawthorne Freight. We met in Phoenix." "Alyssa, I was wondering if I'd ever hear from you. Please tell me you're finally ready to have that conversation about your future. Actually, my situation has changed significantly. Are you still looking for senior operations talent?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear her sitting up straighter. "What kind of change are we talking about?" I gave her the abbreviated version. "Bereavement leave, sudden termination, replacement by unqualified family member." I kept my tone professional. Factual, unemotional. "You're telling me Miranda Shaw fired you for taking bereavement leave and replaced you with her nephew?" Clara's voice had gone from interested to incredulous. "That's the stupidest thing I've heard all year, and I work with Fortune 500 executives." "I'm exploring my options. Your offer in Phoenix, is that still on the table?" "Honey, that offer was for an operations manager position. Since then, we've expanded our West Coast operations significantly. What I have now is much bigger." She explained the role Director of Operations for OmniRoute's entire West Coast division, overseeing logistics for everything from Seattle to San Diego, managing a budget that was triple what I'd handled at Hawthorne, leading a team of 40-plus professionals. The salary she mentioned made me grip the phone tighter. It was 60% more than what Miranda had been paying me. "There's just one issue," Clara continued. "I assume you signed a non-compete with Hawthorne." "I did. 2 years covers most major logistics companies in the region." "That's a problem. Unless," I could hear her thinking. "How exactly did they terminate you? What documentation do you have?" I sent her the termination email, my original bereavement request, and Miranda's approving response. Clara went quiet for a long moment. "Alyssa, I'm not a lawyer, but this looks like textbook wrongful termination. Non-competes are generally unenforceable when the employer terminates without cause, especially under these circumstances. But you need to talk to someone who specializes in employment law." She gave me the name of an attorney, David Chen, partner at Morrison Chen and Associates. "Tell him I referred you. David's destroyed more non-competes than anyone else in the state." 2 hours later, I was sitting in David Chen's downtown office watching him review my employment documents with the focused intensity of a surgeon examining x-rays. David was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and the kind of sharp suit that suggested he won more cases than he lost. His office walls were lined with frame settlements and legal victories, including several against major logistics companies. "This is interesting," he said, looking up from the papers. "Very interesting." "Good. Interesting or bad interesting?" "Good for you. Catastrophic for them." "Alyssa, this termination is so legally questionable that I'm surprised their own legal department signed off on it." He explained the law in terms I could understand. Non-compete agreements were designed to protect companies from employees who might steal clients or trade secrets, but they had to be reasonable in scope and duration, and they couldn't be used to punish employees unfairly. More importantly, David continued, they're generally unenforceable when the employer terminates the employee without proper cause. And terminating someone for taking legally protected bereavement leave definitely qualifies as improper cause. So the non-compete is void? Almost certainly. But even if it weren't, Hawthorne would have to prove they're being harmed by your new employment. Given that they replaced you with someone completely unqualified, that's going to be a tough argument to make. David leaned back in his chair and I caught a glimpse of the predatory smile that probably made opposing counsel very nervous. There's something else. If you take this position with OmniRoute and Hawthorne tries to enforce the non-compete, we can countersue for wrongful termination, discrimination, and violation of the Family and Medical Leave Act. The potential damages would be substantial. How substantial? Lost wages? Emotional distress? Punitive damages. We're talking 6 figures, possibly 7, depending on how badly this impacts their business operations. I felt something shift in my chest. Not revenge exactly, but justice. The kind of justice that comes with documentation and legal precedent and the full weight of employment law. What do you need from me? Keep documenting everything. Every communication, every impact on your former team, every operational failure that results from your replacement. And Alyssa, David's expression became serious. Be very careful about what you say and to whom. This is going to get complicated and you want to make sure you're always the professional in the room. I called Clara back from the parking garage. The non-compete is toast, I said. When can we talk about the position? How about Thursday? Fly out to Los Angeles, meet the team, see our West Coast hub. If we're going to do this, let's do it right. Clara, I should mention, there's a possibility that Hawthorne might try to cause problems when they find out. She laughed, and it wasn't a particularly nice sound. Alyssa, I've been competing with companies like Hawthorne for 20 years. If Miranda Shaw wants to start a war over losing the best operations manager in the region, because she prioritized nepotism over competence, I'm absolutely prepared for that conversation. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. As I drove home, I thought about Miranda's reaction when she found out I'd landed at her biggest competitor. The shock, the anger, the scrambling to figure out how to explain to her board why she'd handed their best manager to the competition. But more than that, I thought about my father. He'd spent 30 years in engineering building systems that lasted solving problems that mattered. He'd taught me that when someone treats you poorly, you don't sink to their level. You rise above it and succeed so thoroughly that their behavior becomes obviously embarrassingly wrong. Miranda Shaw thought she'd eliminated a problem when she fired me. What she'd actually done was create a much bigger problem for herself. And unlike her nephew, I was extremely qualified to solve the kinds of problems she was about to face. Wednesday evening, I met my former team at Murphy's Pub, a dive bar 3 miles from Hawthorne, where we used to celebrate hitting quarterly targets. It felt strange sitting in our usual booth, but knowing I'd never be part of those celebrations again. The stories they told me should have been funny. If they weren't destroying people's livelihoods and ruining client relationships, they might have been hilarious. Yesterday, Marcus said, stirring his beer with frustration, Jordan asked me why we need insurance on shipments, like why we can't just trust that nothing bad will happen. Elena shook her head. He approved a route change that added 6 hours to a time-sensitive medical supply delivery. When I tried to explain why that was a problem, he said, "Can't they just wait until tomorrow?" Sarah had the worst story. Remember the Henderson manufacturing contract? The one we fought for 2 years. To get Jordan confused their shipping address with their billing address and sent $50,000 worth of precision machinery to their accounting firm in Delaware, instead of their factory in Tennessee. I felt sick. Henderson Manufacturing wasn't just a client. They were the kind of account that defined quarterly performance. Losing them would ripple through the entire company. What did Miranda say about that? That's the crazy part, Sarah continued. She blamed the warehouse team, said there was a breakdown in communication protocols. Jordan wasn't even mentioned in the incident report. Marcus leaned forward. Alyssa, it's been a week and we've had more operational failures than we had in the previous 6 months combined. Clients are calling to complain, drivers are confused about routes, and Miranda keeps having closed-door meetings with Jordan where she explains away every single mistake. She's protecting him, Elena said. No matter what he screws up, she finds someone else to blame. Yesterday, she wrote up Tony in shipping for failing to double-check instructions when Jordan gave him the wrong coordinates for a delivery. I listened to story after story, each one worse than the last. What emerged was a picture of complete operational breakdown, combined with systematic blame shifting. Miranda wasn't just covering for her nephew's incompetence, she was actively rewriting reality to protect him. How are you holding up? I asked them. Honestly, Marcus rubbed his temples. I've been at Hawthorne for 8 years. I've never seen morale this low. Half the warehouse is talking about looking for other jobs. The drivers don't trust the routing anymore, so they're calling in constantly to verify instructions. Customer service is getting destroyed with complaints. Sarah nodded. And the worst part is we all know how to fix these problems. We try to help Jordan, but Miranda's made it clear that any suggestions are seen as undermining his authority. So you're not allowed to do your jobs properly because it might make him look bad. Exactly. I took a sip of my wine and chose my words carefully. Have any of you thought about what you want to do long-term? Elena looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, you're all talented professionals with years of experience. If Hawthorne isn't the place where you can use that experience effectively, maybe it's time to consider other options. Marcus caught on first. You're saying we should look for other jobs. I'm saying you should think about what's best for your careers. Companies that value experience and competence over family connections. I pulled out my phone and showed them OmniRoute's website. For example, they're expanding their West Coast operations, looking for experienced logistics professionals who understand complex supply chains. The table went quiet. Sarah studied the website, scrolling through job postings. They're hiring for every position we currently hold, she said slowly. Interesting coincidence, I replied. Elena looked up at me. Alyssa, are you working with them? I had an interview. The culture seems very different from what you're describing at Hawthorne. They promote based on performance, not politics. They value experience and innovation. Marcus was already pulling out his own phone. What's the application process like? I couldn't say, but I imagine they'd be very interested in a team that already works well together, understands the industry, and has proven experience managing complex logistics. Over the next hour, I watched my former team transform from frustrated employees complaining about their situation to professionals strategically planning their futures. I didn't recruit them. I didn't have to. The contrast between what they were experiencing and what they deserved was obvious to everyone at the table. One thing, I said as we prepared to leave. If any of you decide to explore other opportunities, be smart about it. Don't let Miranda know you're looking. Don't discuss it at work. And whatever you do, don't give them any ammunition to claim you're being disloyal. Sarah nodded. Because if they think we're jumping ship, they'll start looking for reasons to fire us before we can leave. Exactly. Play it professional, do your current jobs well, and keep your options private until you're ready to make a move. Elena raised her glass. To new opportunities. To working for people who actually know what they're doing, Marcus added. As I drove home, my phone started buzzing with text messages, screenshots of OmniRoute job postings, questions about application deadlines, requests for references. By the time I got to my father's house, 3 of my former teammates had already submitted applications. I'd been careful not to directly recruit them, not to make promises I couldn't keep, not to give Miranda any legal grounds to claim I was poaching employees. But I'd done something more effective. I'd shown them that they had options, that their skills were valued, that they didn't have to accept incompetent leadership just because it came with family connections. Miranda had made the mistake of thinking that firing me would solve her problem. What she'd actually done was create a much bigger problem. She'd demonstrated to her best employees that loyalty meant nothing, competence was optional, and family politics mattered more than performance. And now, those employees were looking for somewhere else to take their talents. The beautiful irony was that Miranda had created this situation entirely through her own actions. I wasn't stealing her employees. I was simply providing them with information about opportunities that matched their qualifications and career goals. If she lost her entire operations team in the process, well, that was just the natural consequence of her management decisions. Sometimes, the best revenge is just letting people see what better looks like. Friday afternoon, I was reviewing contract details for my upcoming OmniRoute position when my phone rang. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't answer. Hello? Ms. Grant. This is Jordan Shaw from Hawthorne Freight. I sat up straighter. This was unexpected. Jordan, what can I do for you? I was wondering if we could meet to talk. There are some things about the situation at Hawthorne that I think you should know. His voice was shaky, nervous. This wasn't the confident young executive I'd glimpsed through Miranda's office window. This sounded like someone who was scared. What kind of things? I'd rather not discuss it over the phone. Could we meet somewhere? Maybe that coffee shop on 5th Street near the courthouse. The location choice was interesting. Public, but not somewhere either of us would run into Hawthorne employees. I checked my watch. I can be there in an hour. Thank you. And Ms. Grant, please don't tell anyone about this call. The coffee shop was busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough for conversation. I found Jordan at a corner table looking nothing like the polished professional I'd seen before. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his hair was disheveled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't been sleeping well. Jordan, I said, sitting across from him. You look terrible. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's because I feel terrible. Ms. Grant, I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that I'm not proud of any of this. I pulled out my phone and set it on the table. Before we start, I want to be completely transparent. I'd like to record this conversation, for both of our protection. He nodded quickly. Yes, actually, that's probably smart. I want there to be a record of this. I started the recording app. This is Alyssa Grant, and I'm here with Jordan Shaw on Friday, October 13th at approximately 3:15 p.m. Jordan, do you consent to this conversation being recorded? Yes, I consent. Okay. What did you want to tell me? Jordan took a deep breath. First, I want you to know that I never asked for your job. I didn't even know you existed until Aunt Miranda told me you'd been let go. Your aunt, Miranda Shaw, is my mother's sister. When I got fired from my last job in Orlando, she offered me a position at Hawthorne. I thought it would be some entry-level role where I could learn the business properly. But it wasn't. No, she told me I was replacing someone who'd left suddenly, and that I'd be managing operations. I tried to tell her I wasn't qualified, that I'd never run anything like this before, but she said I just needed confidence. Jordan's hands were shaking as he reached for his coffee. Ms. Grant, I've been in this job for 2 weeks, and I've made more mistakes than I can count. Every day something goes wrong because I don't understand the systems you built. And every day, Aunt Miranda tells me it's not my fault that the problems existed before I got there. But you know that's not true. Of course it's not true. Your former team keeps trying to help me, but Miranda told them they're not allowed to question my decisions. She said, any employee who undermines my authority will be terminated. I leaned forward. Jordan, why are you telling me this? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Because I found out why she really wanted me in this position, and it has nothing to do with family loyalty. What do you mean? Yesterday, Miranda had me sign off on some financial transfers. Client escrow funds, she called them. money that clients pay in advance for shipping services. She said it was routine that all operations managers handled these transfers. The bottom of my stomach dropped out. Client escrow funds were sacred in the logistics business. They were held in trust, never touched, except for specific documented purposes. What kind of transfers? Moving money from the client escrow accounts to what she called operational development funds. She said it was temporary, just to cover some expansion costs while we waited for a bank loan to come through. Jordan, that's not how escrow accounts work. Those funds can only be used for the specific client services they were designated for. I know that now. I did some research after I signed the papers, and I realized what I'd authorized. His voice was getting quieter. Ms. Grant, I think my aunt has been using client money for other purposes, and she needed someone in the operations manager role who wouldn't ask questions. Someone who didn't understand the systems well enough to recognize what was happening. Exactly. And if it ever came to light, I'd be the one who signed off on the transfers. I'd be the scapegoat. I felt a chill run down my spine. This was bigger than nepotism or incompetent management. This was financial fraud, and Miranda had positioned her nephew to take the fall if it was ever discovered. Jordan, do you have documentation of these transfers? He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. Copies of everything I signed. Ms. Grant, I've authorized the movement of almost $2 million from client accounts over the past 2 weeks. $2 million. I stared at the papers he slid across the table, my mind racing through the implications. If clients ever requested an audit of their escrow accounts, Hawthorne would be unable to produce the funds. The company would face criminal charges, civil lawsuits, and complete financial collapse. Why are you bringing this to me? Because you're the only person who knows how these systems are supposed to work, and you're the only person who doesn't work for Aunt Miranda. Jordan's voice cracked. I'm 24 years old. I made some stupid decisions in my previous jobs, but I'm not a criminal. I won't be the fall guy for whatever she's been doing. What do you want me to do with this information? I don't know. I just know that if I stay silent, I'm going to end up in prison for something I didn't understand I was doing. I studied Jordan's face. The fear was genuine, but there was something else there, a kind of moral clarity that I hadn't expected from someone who'd benefited from nepotism his entire career. Jordan, if you're serious about this, we need to talk to my attorney, and you need to understand that once we start this process, there's no going back. Your aunt is going to know you talked. She's going to figure it out eventually anyway. When the audits happen, when clients start asking questions, she'll throw me under the bus without hesitation. And you're willing to testify about what she asked you to sign, if it means not going to prison for fraud? Yes, absolutely. I looked at the documents in front of me, then at the young man who'd unknowingly been set up to destroy his own future. Miranda Shaw hadn't just fired me illegally. She'd committed financial crimes and planned to frame her own nephew for them. Jordan, I'm going to help you. But first, I need you to do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that? He nodded. Go back to work on Monday. Act normal. Don't sign anything else without reading it completely. And if your aunt asks you to authorize any more financial transfers, tell her you want to review the documentation over the weekend. What are you going to do? I'm going to make sure that when this comes to light, the right person takes responsibility for what's been happening. As I watched Jordan leave the coffee shop, I realized that Miranda Shaw had made her final fatal mistake. She'd assumed that family loyalty would keep her nephew quiet, that his inexperience would make him the perfect patsy, and that firing me would eliminate the one person who understood her systems well enough to recognize fraud. She was wrong on all 3 counts. And now, I had everything I needed to make sure justice was served. Monday morning, I walked into OmniRoot's legal department carrying a briefcase that would change everything. Clara had set up the meeting with their general counsel, Patricia Wong, a sharp-eyed attorney who'd spent 15 years handling corporate compliance issues. Patricia, I need to share some information about my former employer that could impact OmniRoute's business operations, I said, setting Jordan's documentation on her conference table. She reviewed the financial transfer documents while I explained the situation. Jordan's recorded confession, the pattern of escrow fund misappropriation, the systematic cover-up of operational failures. By the time I finished, Patricia's expression had shifted from professional interest to predatory focus. Alyssa, do you understand what you've just handed us? Evidence of financial fraud at our biggest competitor? More than that, you've given us legitimate grounds to approach Hawthorne's major clients with concerns about the security of their escrow funds. Patricia explained the strategy. OmniRoute couldn't directly accuse Hawthorne of fraud without risking libel charges, but they could legitimately inform clients about potential irregularities that might affect their business relationships. We'll start with Henderson Manufacturing, Patricia said. They have almost $300,000 in escrow with Hawthorne right now. If they request an audit and Hawthorne can't produce the funds, they'll terminate their contract immediately and look for a new logistics provider. Exactly, and we'll be ready with a comprehensive proposal to handle all their shipping needs. The next 48 hours unfolded like a perfectly orchestrated business campaign. OmniRoute's sales team reached out to Hawthorne's top 5 clients not to steal business, but to offer confidential briefings about potential industry compliance issues that might affect their supply chain security. Henderson Manufacturing was the first to bite. Their CFO requested an emergency meeting with OmniRoute on Tuesday afternoon. By Wednesday morning, they terminated their contract with Hawthorne and signed with OmniRoute. 3 other major clients followed within the week. But the real earthquake came from an unexpected source. Janet Morrison, Miranda's assistant, called me Thursday evening. I almost didn't answer. Her name showing up on my caller ID felt like a trap. Alyssa, I need to talk to you. Off the record. Janet, I don't think that's appropriate. Please. I've been Miranda's assistant for 6 years. I know where all the bodies are buried and I can't be part of this anymore. We met at the same coffee shop where Jordan had confessed everything. Janet looked exhausted, like someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret for too long. I've been watching what Miranda's been doing to cover for Jordan, she said. The blame shifting, the document alterations, the way she's been moving money around. But it's worse than you know. Janet had access to Miranda's emails, her calendar, her financial authorizations. What she'd discovered was a pattern of escrow fund manipulation, going back almost 2 years long before Jordan arrived. She's been using client money to cover operational shortfalls, then replacing it when new contracts brought in cash. But with Jordan making so many expensive mistakes, she can't keep up anymore. Janet, why are you telling me this? Because the board doesn't know. Miranda's been hiding the financial irregularities in operational expense reports, and the board trusts her to manage day-to-day finances. Janet handed me a USB drive. Email trails, financial authorizations, everything. Miranda fired you to get rid of the one person who might have noticed what she was doing, but she couldn't fire me without losing her ability to cover this up. What do you want me to do with this? Get it to the board. They deserve to know what's been happening to their company. That evening, I called Patricia Wong. We need to expand our legal strategy. I have evidence that the fraud is more extensive than we thought. Friday morning, Patricia hand-delivered a confidential report to Hawthorne's board of directors. Not an accusation, but a compliance concern that required immediate internal investigation. The board meeting was called for Monday morning. By Monday afternoon, Miranda Shaw had been suspended pending a full audit of company finances. That same Monday, Marcus called me with news I'd been expecting. Alyssa OmniRoute just offered me a position as Senior Logistics Coordinator. 15% salary increase, better benefits, and I'd be working with you again. That's wonderful, Marcus! Are you going to take it? Already accepted. Sarah and Elena got offers too. Elena's going to be lead route optimization specialist. Sarah's getting promoted to client relations manager. By the end of the week, my entire former team had joined OmniRoute. Not because I recruited them, but because OmniRoute was rapidly expanding to handle the influx of new business from former Hawthorne clients. The irony was perfect. Miranda had fired me to make room for her incompetent nephew. In doing so, she'd triggered a chain of events that resulted in her suspension, her company's near collapse, and the migration of her best employees to her biggest competitor. Jordan, to his credit, had testified fully to the internal investigators. His cooperation helped uncover the full scope of Miranda's financial misconduct and likely saved him from criminal prosecution. Standing in OmniRoute's new West Coast Operations Center, watching my former team coordinate shipments with the efficiency and professionalism Miranda had thrown away, I felt something I hadn't expected: gratitude. Not for the betrayal itself, but for what it had revealed. About who my real allies were, about what I was capable of achieving when I stopped limiting myself to other people's expectations, about the difference between loyalty and enabling. Miranda Shaw had thought firing me would solve her problems. Instead, she'd freed me to become the architect of her downfall. Sometimes the best revenge is just being better at business than the people who underestimated you. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new corner office on the 32nd floor of OmniRoute's headquarters, reviewing quarterly reports that would have made my father proud. The West Coast division had exceeded performance targets by 18%. Our client retention rate was 97%, and we'd captured 60% of the logistics market that Hawthorne Freight had lost during their financial collapse. The nameplate on my desk read, Alyssa Grant, Vice President of Strategic Operations. Clara knocked on my door holding a bottle of champagne and grinning like someone who'd just closed the deal of the century. "I just got off the phone with the board," she said, setting the champagne on my desk. "Congratulations, Alyssa. You've been promoted to Senior Vice President. You'll be overseeing strategic operations for the entire Western United States." I looked out the window at the city below, thinking about the journey that had brought me here. From a devastated daughter bearing her father to a terminated employee questioning her worth to a senior executive running operations for one of the largest logistics companies in the country. "There's something else," Clara continued. "Jordan Shaw called this morning. The internal investigation at Hawthorne is complete, and he wanted you to know that his testimony helped uncover the full scope of Miranda's financial misconduct." Miranda Shaw had been terminated for cause and was facing criminal charges for embezzlement and fraud. Hawthorne Freight had been forced to sell their assets to cover client restitution payments. Most of their former employees had found positions with competitors, including OmniRoute. "Jordan's doing well, by the way," Clara added. "He took a junior position at a small firm in Phoenix, starting from the ground up, learning the business properly. He wanted me to thank you for giving him the chance to do the right thing." That afternoon, my assistant brought me a certified letter from Morrison Chen & Associates, the law firm that had handled the bankruptcy proceedings for Hawthorne Freight. Inside was a formal letter of apology from Hawthorne's board of directors, acknowledging that my termination had been improper and discriminatory. Attached was a settlement offer for $250,000, plus a confidential recommendation letter that could be used for future career opportunities. I set the letter aside and opened the second document. It was a personal note from Jordan, handwritten on plain paper. "Ms. Grant, I wanted you to know that standing up to my aunt was the first time in my life I felt like I'd earned something through my own actions rather than family connections. You showed me what real integrity looks like. Thank you for that lesson, and thank you for saving my future, Jordan." That evening, I drove to the hiking trail where my father and I used to walk when I was a child. The same trail where he'd taught me about problem solving, about standing up for what's right, about the difference between being smart and being wise. I sat on the wooden bench overlooking the valley, pulled out my phone, and looked at the photo I'd taken last week. My entire team at OmniRoute's annual performance celebration, all of us smiling, all of us exactly where we belonged. Marcus had been promoted to Senior Operations Manager. Sarah was now Director of Client Relations. Elena was leading our new route optimization department. And me, the woman who'd been fired for taking time to bury her father, I was now responsible for strategic operations across half the country. I thought about Miranda Shaw, probably sitting in a lawyer's office somewhere, trying to explain to investigators how she'd justified stealing client money to cover her nephew's mistakes. I thought about the moment she'd hugged me in her office, telling me family came first, while already planning to replace me. The funny thing was, she'd been right about family coming first. She just hadn't understood what family really meant. Real family doesn't abandon you in your darkest moments. Real family doesn't throw you away when you become inconvenient. Real family shows up at your father's funeral and supports you through the worst week of your life. I'd found my real family at work among the people who valued competence over connections, loyalty over politics, integrity over convenience. And when Miranda betrayed that family, she'd given us all the motivation we needed to build something better. I stood up, took one last look at the valley below, and spoke to the evening air, knowing my father would have appreciated the irony of what had happened. Justice doesn't always roar, Dad. Sometimes it arrives quietly with receipts. The settlement money would go into a college fund for Marcus's daughter. The promotion would let me build the kind of logistics operation that prioritized people over politics. And the lesson, well, the lesson would stay with me forever. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes, getting fired is just the universe's way of telling you it's time to stop settling for less than you deserve. And sometimes, the people who try to destroy you end up being the architects of your greatest success. 6 months ago, I'd been Alyssa Grant operations manager, loyal employee, someone who believed that doing good work was enough. Today, I was Alyssa Grant, senior vice president leader of one of the most successful logistics operations in the Western United States and living proof that loyalty is a two-way street. Miranda Shaw had taught me that lesson the hard way. But in the end, I was grateful for the education. After all, she'd shown me exactly who I didn't want to be. And in doing so, she'd helped me become exactly who I was meant to become. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just wins. Sometimes the people who try to break you end up being the ones who make you stronger. What's the most unfair thing that's ever happened to you at work? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story of workplace justice, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.